Now, it's 25 minutes to 6, and eliminating the deficit is a phrase you would have heard a lot during this general election campaign. The deficit, as we always like to point out, is the difference between the amount of money coming into the government and the amount that it is spending. It's different from the debt, which is the overall amount that the government owes. Well, today we get the latest figures on how that spending is going. In the last year, it looks like it'll come in at just under the £90 billion target deficit for the year. Well, the four main parties have all promised to eliminate the overspend by the end of the next parliament, some earlier than others, all of them looking for different ways. But if that sounds familiar, well, you would have heard the same from the current government at the beginning of this parliament. Can any of them really balance the books? Jamie Murray joins us, former economist at the Office for Budget Responsibility, now senior economist at Bloomberg Intelligence. Good morning, Jamie.
Morning.
Right. If we start from the ground up here, what roughly at the moment is the state of the government's bank balance?
Well, as you say, we're sort of spending about 90 billion more than we're raising in tax revenues. So the figures today will probably show that this deficit is maybe about £1 billion smaller than the OBR expected in its March forecast. But that's really sort of back of the sofa type stuff for the government. It's not an enormous difference. It's quite usual to make that sort of mistake in terms of the forecasts.
And when did we, as a nation, start spending more than we earn? Is this a normal thing for governments to do?
Well, it's not usual. So the UK economy had the biggest shock it's experienced in generations during the crisis. And rather than increasing the level of spending, really what happened was the economy shrunk, and so the tax receipts that we got declined, in the sense that the financial sector was revealed to be a lot less helpful than we thought it was, and a lot of the revenues that depended on it came in weaker than we expected.
Yeah, because there's a lot of accusations made about the government at the time should have, they took their eye off the ball. But isn't that the case, that anyone who's in power should be aware of whether or not their tax revenues are going to drop? Sometimes it's fairly obvious, sometimes it's not. It's something that comes along that's completely unpredictable.
Yeah, the fact is, had a different government been in power, it's very unlikely that we'd have avoided the same fate. Labour probably spent a little bit more than they should have done, but it's nothing in the order of, in the scheme of things, really. In the end, it was the financial crisis that did for us, and no one really saw it coming.
So is the deficit moving the right way, or is this just mumbo jumbo?
Well, it is getting smaller. It's just getting smaller a lot more slowly than people expected. And that's because the economy is not growing as fast as expected, and people differ in their views about whether that's something to do with what the government's done, or whether the rest of the world is to blame, or the fact that the financial crisis was worse than people thought and lasted for longer.
Jamie, the United States, we often say the economy is doing very well in the States, but I mean, they run a very substantial budget deficit, don't they?
Yes, I think they've seen more progress than we have. And one of the reasons is that productivity in the US has grown a lot faster than it has here. Now, that productivity is the amount of output we produce per hour. And the fact that we've had a bad performance and they've had a good one explains a lot of the reason why their public finances look better than ours. But
a lot of people in this country will shake their heads because they've heard this about productivity, and it's almost as if you're accusing the workforce of being idle or lazy or incompetent. But surely, if there is a problem with productivity, where does the blame lie, and how do you correct it?
Yeah, I don't think anyone genuinely thinks that workers are somehow to blame. It's really the fact, well, if you want to blame someone, you could probably blame the financial sector for not allocating resources effectively, in the sense that seems to be one reason why we're not getting better at doing things more efficient. Remember, productivity is about getting better at doing things. It's about improving the processes about how you do things, and you need sort of new firms to come up with those, and they're not really coming.
And Jamie, just one final thought. We talk quite a lot about the deficit. Maybe we talk less about the overall public debt, and that is a huge number, very far north of £1 trillion. Is that ever realistically going to get paid off?
Well, if you look at the debt relative to the incomes that we all earn, like the national GDP, debt is now lower, or it's been above 100% of GDP for much of the last 300 years. So this isn't anything unusual in that sense. So yes, I think it's perfectly reasonable to assume it will be paid off one way or another in the future.
One way. Jamie, as always, thank you very much for your time. That is Jamie Murray. It's 20 to 6.